Good afternoon and welcome to this joint meeting of the Budget and Finance Committee and the Public Safety Committee. This is also a meeting agendized as a special meeting of the Los Angeles City Council because of the number of members involved. And we're going to be proceeding with the joint meeting, which will deal only with item number 1. That meeting will then conclude and we'll continue with the ordinary business of the Budget and Finance Committee at the conclusion of our consideration of item number 1. So we will start with, we'll go ahead and take our, you know what, Mr. Englander, on the joint matter, do you have a preference about taking cards first or later? Okay, so let's go ahead and take our cards on item number 1. We'll hear first from Jane Layton. Who will be followed by Eric Previn, who will be followed by Mr. Herman.
Pardon me, Mr. Chair, would you like me to read the item into the record?
Yes, please.
Item number 1 is City Administrative Officer reports relative to equipment lease purchase financing of replacement radios for the Los Angeles Police Department and the Los Angeles Fire Department.
Good afternoon.
Honorable committee members, good afternoon. My name is Jane Layton with Harris Corporation. I'm here regarding agenda item 1 relative to replacement radios for LAPD and FD. There are multiple issues with this procurement as currently constructed. Allow me to speak to 2 specific topics. 1, the decision to procure Motorola radios will ensure an additional $20 million expenditure at full implementation. That's a 31% increase to the stated budget request. The city would also, number 2, would acquire radios that do not have internal FirstNet capabilities, requiring procurement of additional and costly bolted-on external devices. Given the rugged environment in which first responders operate, there's an increased risk that an external device will compromise performance and reliability. We respectfully request to table discussions on this item and direct ITA, LAPD, LAFD to utilize the city's competitive bid process, which was designed to be comprehensive, transparent, and most of all, objective. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Previn, followed by Mr. Herman.
Greetings, it's Eric Previn. I too have concerns about the lack of real competition here. We're talking about a $64.5 million deal to lease these radios that are about 11,500 units, which is about 5,000 plus a unit. This is above the market, and I'm concerned that we haven't considered lighter, modern-aged equipment. Motorola obviously are treasured partners. I don't think Englander needs to be reminded, as they are lobbying prodigiously through Englander, Knabe, and Allen to the tune of $60,000 annually here, but also at the county, so that's over $100,000. We're into well over $500,000 just while looking at this particular thing. Berghoff is in the crowd. He jumped in October to start lobbying as well. We got to get this done for those guys, but not for the public, and that's the problem. The problem is we want fair, open, competitive bidding because that's where the public benefits the most. And I have nothing against Motorola. They've done a great job of clinging to this business year in, year out for decades, but there are a lot of smart, cool people who make radios. We should hear from them, and we should consider it. And this is just like Axon, the folks who gave us the taser deal, 4,400 tasers. You can't get arrested with those things now because they're a disaster. Thank you.
Thank you. Our final speaker on this matter is Mr. Herman.
So in regards to the replacement of radios, I think the replacement comes after the cadet program where those radios were stolen. And the Los Angeles Police Department, along with the fire department, is now doing a check and balance and managing their equipment better. But as you see, there was no community impact statement other than my public comment that the replacement comes to the stolen cadet program or failure of the cadet program, taking police equipment on their joyrides and fun.
You're off topic.
No, sir, I'm talking about replacement radios.
This is about a procurement.
There was radios stolen, Mr. Krikorian. Would you please let me speak? Thank you. So in addition to how the city administrative officer reports reflects this negative declaration in which I am broadcasting in my attempt not to have my Brown Act violations submitted on the record by Mr. Krikorian, 54950. Stop interrupting the speakers.
All right. I'd like to ask the CAO to come up, along with representatives of the fire department, the police department, and ITA. Good afternoon.
Afternoon. So Natalie Brill from the CAO's office. This office was requested to negotiate a lease agreement for the purchase of the radios as requested by ITA, Fire, and Police. So we looked at the proposal from Motorola and requesting that you adopt the equipment lease purchase agreement that is attached to this report for the amount not to exceed $64.5 million to finance 11,500 police handheld radios, 4,500 police vehicle radios, 3,500 fire handheld radios, and the related equipment. We're also requesting that you authorize an increase in the 2016-17 equipment list for both of those departments, because those equipment lists had lower radio amounts, but this equipment lease allows for more than those radios. We're also asking you to authorize the CAO to go ahead and negotiate and finish the lease, and to instruct ITA, with the assistance of police and fire, to come back in 120 days to the Public Safety Committee for council approval at the end of the design review phase on the timeline and implementation strategy to deploy these radios. Given the time lapse and the request to do the best financing for the city, the CAO continued to negotiate with Motorola and is coming to you with the revised financing plan. It's still for $64.5 million is within the parameters, but it changes the yearly payments of that lease to $9.2 million a year over 7 years, which is the life of the radios, instead of $12.9 million. The first lease payment will occur next fiscal year in 18-19, and the last one will be in 24-25. In addition to that, we negotiated 4 additional no-cost amendments to the proposal. The first one had to do with accessories that were added that you can see in attachment C to the equipment list. The second one extended the warranty from 5 years to 7 years. There was also a request to continue the parts available for these radios to 5 years beyond the cancellation notice of producing these radios, or till February 1st, 2030. And the last provision that was negotiated had to do with the city working with Motorola to produce a better way of Motorola informing the city on these technical service bulletins that they issue every once in a while. So that's basically what the report does. We request that this resolution be passed on to council so we can execute this agreement.
All right. Thank you. I'd like to turn it over to the Chair of Public Safety, Mitchell Englander.
Great. Thank you very much. And first, before I sort of go through a little bit on this, I want to thank everybody at the table, particularly Ted Ross, ITA, LAPD, LAFD, and the CAO's office. This has been an ongoing issue of needs for technology for our officers, our first responders, that was approved in last year's budget and concept to start at least beginning to plan for the implementation and acquisition of the new radio systems. With that, when this came to the Public Safety Committee back in May, I had a long laundry list of questions, concerns, and brought everybody to the table, all the departments. We worked for months and months grinding down on all of those issues that are incorporated in the CAO's report, and I want to thank you all for that. There were certainly a lot of questions on the table. I think this is by far a much better comprehensive solution to than what was first presented. And so I thank you all for that. Some of the highlights beyond that, too, is for example, a guarantee on how long the radios will last for us. And I want to ask Ted, if I could, since you're here, and first to thank you, because you've really led the effort as the head of technology in all things LA City, so I appreciate that. And if you could just lead us off to sort of where we're at today from your perspective and versus maybe where we've come from.
Certainly. And so as the councilman stated and as was described by the CAO, the working group together worked very hard to ensure that there was the best possible deal. Anything of this size is a lot of effort. Sergeant Gomez and police department did a fantastic job of identifying their needs. Fire department, the same. And whenever you're dealing with, as we've experienced just in the recent fires, whenever you're dealing with something of this kind of magnitude, handheld radios, devices inside of vehicles, etc., it's a lot of work and a lot of effort. As the CEO, you've summarized just some of the major points. Additional accessories provided free of charge. Extended warranty moving from 5-year to 7-year with no additional cost. Ensuring that the devices won't be seen end of life during the course of the loan, I should say the financing, in addition above and beyond 5 years plus beyond that. There were a lot of benefits that I think that were worked through, and so I think we feel very confidently that as police department, fire department need to replace these radios, this is a highly discounted deal, going from around $144 million of list price value down to $64.5 million, which takes fire and police department well into the future when it comes to this essential technology.
Well, thank you for that. And with that, if you could also walk us through the implementation. I know it's a little unique, as ITA is going to be heading it up with the assistance of PD and fire, and there will be a report back. If you can walk us through sort of that process.
Certainly. As a part of the implementation, Motorola is taking on a lot of responsibility when it comes to the installation in vehicles and working very closely with police and fire when it comes to the deployment effort of it. As you can imagine, 18,000 of anything is a lot. And so the ability to do it so that it doesn't impact their operations, as well as does so successfully and everything's configured and working properly, is extremely important. So the ITA will work very closely with fire and police department as a part of the design review phase, which is very much the very beginning part of it, in which it's identified how deployment would occur, how vehicles will be rotated in and out, where deployment will occur, so that we can ensure that there's no, minimize any disruption at all to the operations themselves as they're deploying these devices.
Okay, and then that report will come back to the Public Safety Committee and then the full council for approval, correct?
Correct. We're targeting within 120 days. Of course, it depends on us accomplishing the design review phase, but working close with Motorola and, needless to say, fire and police department to make that happen.
Okay, no, thank you very much. And if I could ask Sergeant Gomez as well. I know you took the original lead, as you do all things technology in LAPD, so if you can walk us through sort of your perspective of where we're at today from where we were initially and your thoughts. And then I also wanted to, if with that, if you can address some of the concerns that were brought forth by one of the speakers from Harris and also the letter that they submitted, address those issues in terms of cost and what they're suggesting, as well as the FirstNet capabilities.
Sure, thank you, Councilman. So I think that I agree with all the speakers, and I think one of the big changes that has happened for the police department since we first brought you the initial report is we actually have a new CIO. Mr. Brian Ganley is now on board with the department, so he's a welcome addition to moving forward on this. I think in addition is, without repeating what's already been said at the table, I think the collaborative working together to make the deployment happen in a smooth fashion. Certainly the need has been talked about over and over, and I think it's well recognized by the committee. We'll work together to make sure that it is as smooth as possible. But again, prioritizing the vehicles and the radios and fire and how that all works, I think collectively we'll come to that agreement together. As far as what was stated from the public speaker aspect, is that the radios themselves, I think the indication was that there was a $20 million gap somewhere in there. The negotiated discounted price that came from the Motorola radios include the 700 and 800 spectrum. However, it was discounted, so in the documentation that's provided to the CAO's office, it actually shows it removed, and that's because it's a no-cost item. So in fact, the radios do have that capability, which is what we need in terms of interoperability, to have a multi-band radio, and as Mr. Ross said, to be able to take us into the future. That is actually included in the cost of the radio, or into the capability. It's just a discounted was provided on top of that in order to remove that dollar value from the radio itself. complicated answer to a simple question, but the bottom line is that we're confident that the radios that we're getting will meet our needs today for both police and fire and meet those needs moving into the future.
Thank you very much. And if I can ask fire to weigh in on this as well, critically important, particularly since probably the highest need of both agencies in terms of today and what you need. Now, also the fact that now, and I believe this latest CAO memo also highlights the idea that the retention for radios is now part of the package as well, where we can actually retain as many as we need in terms of the old existing radios, so we can use them as floaters, loaners, emergencies, those kinds of things, which we never had the ability and capability to do before. But if you could
Absolutely.
just highlight some of the
from
proposal items.
And I want to echo the appreciation the fire department and the fire chief specifically has to council for all the work and effort that's been put into this thing. It couldn't have come at a more important time for the fire department. The need for portable radios on the fire line, especially the need for interoperability, has been tested probably more than it has in any of our careers or tenure here in the city. And we continue to see this operational need and urgency for these radios. I think in terms of your question specifically about where we are today versus where we were, we certainly have in great detail gone through every line item in the proposal. I think we've gotten the most favorable terms. We've gotten a lot of concession in terms of not only time and duration of the radio, but as you mentioned, sir, the idea that we can keep some of these radios that we're going to eventually be turning in during the transition. For us, when we field the portable radios, it's not as easy as we can just field some and not all. The training aspect, the whole utilization of the radio out in the field is so critical. How we time that and the availability of these additional radios while we do it is critical. So we're looking really forward to it. It's a long time coming, and it's absolutely a very major critical need for the fire department and the fire service generally here.
I'll make sure that we have an opportunity for my colleagues to ask questions as well, but just to close, I don't think this could be happening at a more critical time, where we've just come off certainly the worst fires that I've seen in certainly recent history, and it's both PD, fire, all the volunteers, CEMP, everybody that has really been on the front line, and that front line requires critical communication, continuous communication in some of the worst terrain and difficult situations. So I appreciate and very grateful for all of our first responders and all the partners to get through this last week. And not a single life, although unfortunately some horses were lost, but not a single life, a human life was lost, which is just here in Los Angeles incredible. Having seen the coordinated effort to have thousands of first responders from different agencies be able to collaborate and communicate in those just unexplainable conditions. It's just a war zone. I was at the CP. I was throughout a lot of the fires throughout a lot of the different neighborhoods, and the fact that we can, and now we'll be able to have a much better coordinated effort through communication is just so important. So thank you all for all your work. Okay, Mr. O'Farrell.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Chair Krikorian and Chair Englander and panel. I especially want to congratulate you on the components that you, components that you achieved in the latest negotiations that really improved this package. And for LAFD and LAPD especially, and you're kind of already going there, but could you describe how accepting this contract will result, like literally day-to-day, technically, communication devices in the hands of the first responders, how it will make the residents of Los Angeles safer in terms of response times, in terms of more efficient communications amongst the departments? If you could describe how this will improve day to day and make our residents safer in Los Angeles.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
I'm Brian Ganley, Chief Information Officer, LAPD. These new radios, as the committee and the panel here have stated, are very critical for just those reasons. Among the other things that's extremely critical is improved interoperability. So the ability for an officer and a firefighter to communicate directly out in the field, obviously critical during recent events. We have the capability now, but much improved with this technology. In addition, we're building out a new radio infrastructure with the assistance of Mr. Ross and his department. That's going to bring incredible improvements in our technology and our capabilities. It's going to bring things like over-the-air programming. Right now, an officer in the field, if they have a new assignment, if they need any sort of radio modification, has to actually drive in to have that radio touched and upgraded. With these new radios and the new system that we're building, that'll happen automatically over the air without the need for that extra downtime.
Okay, resulting in more first responders on the ground and available.
Yes, sir.
Literally. Okay, great. Thank you.
And I think from the fire's perspective, there's a few absolutely immediate benefits. The first and foremost is the radios we have are aging out. We literally can't replace or repair many of the radios that we have. The ones that we can still replace and repair, they're going to be out of support at the end of 2018. So immediately upon the execution of this delivery schedule, when we start to field these, we're going to already start saving quite a bit in terms of our ability to service and provide working, robust radios. There's a litany of new features and enhancements, as you can imagine, with the latest technology, especially in the fire service, the ruggedness of the radios, the temperature rating of the radios, the emergency response buttons of the radios. So there's a whole bunch of features that the fire department is looking forward to. But I would say at the very top of the list, probably more so than our PD partners, is the interoperability. The fire service depends every day on our ability to work with our partners. With these wildland fires, our partners and the communications plans are very complex. They change every year, and as you can imagine, and as you've witnessed just in the past 2 weeks, the intricacies of that communication is huge. Today, when we go and work with our partners at the county or at the state or any of the incoming agencies, oftentimes our fire officers have to physically wear 2 or 3 radios, and some of the firefighters on the ground in these areas actually don't have the radio that is communicating on the incident. So there's sort of this relaying of information that has to go that is dangerous, not just for the firefighters, but also for the citizens in that area. So immediately when these new portable radios are deployed, that begins to go away, and our operational capacity and capabilities increases tremendously. So for us, there's such a sense of urgency, and it has just been reinforced and reinforced over the last couple of days and weeks about the importance of this new technology in these radios.
Terrific. Well, again, thanks for your work on negotiating a better contract than the one we started with, and for also saving taxpayer money in the process. Great job. Thank you.
I should have noted at the beginning that Budget and Finance is represented today by myself, Mr. Kretz, and Mr. Blumenfield, and Mr. Englander. So we have a quorum of the committee, and it appears that we also have a quorum of the Public Safety Committee as well. We'll go next to Mr. Kretz.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, first I want to agree with Mr. Englander. Obviously, we just saw an amazing job of coordination between LAPD, LAFD, dozens of other agencies that all came running, and I think certainly in the fire that I was involved with, the Bel Air Skirball Getty fire, could not have had a better result or done any better. My only question about this process, and it certainly points out, not that I really saw any shortfall, but the better the communication, the better. And we know, as the governor said, this is going to be the new normal for us. So rather than having worse and worse fire seasons, the only way we can get ahead of it is by improving our technology and our process. And we saw the pilot program for drones, which was really quite amazing, and I think will probably be used more and more in the future. And obviously, phones that allow different entities to communicate with each other is going to be critical. My only question really is about process. This seems to be a hybrid process in terms of procurement, a little different than we usually use. How different is it from the normal process? Is it what we expected when we first started this procurement? How was it arrived at? Did the council approve it initially, et cetera, et cetera?
So I think I'll take a stab at this, Councilman. Natalie Brill, CAO. So in 2016-17, the council authorized the city to begin looking at new radios. It was included in the budget. It was an up-to amount, and it instructed the city to begin the negotiation process. My understanding, and I think that Police and Fire can attest to this, is there are existing commodity contracts the city participates in, and we use those commodity contracts to look at both radios, I believe the Harris radios and the Motorola radios. Once that system they went and they looked at the radios, and there was a series of tests and meetings held, and I think they can address that better than I can. And once that was completed, the financing aspect was brought to the CAO's office back in February, and we were asked to look at what was the best way of funding $64.5 million, which was what the three departments had agreed to with Motorola, and that's when the financing contract came into effect, and we began the negotiation process. As you know, these financing lease contracts are a long process. They're not an easy process, and we worked with Motorola and with the three departments and with the council to ensure that the best deal was given to the city, and the CAO believes that this is the best financing process that we can come up with. And I'll let the other two departments in ITA address the issue of the actual commodities contracts.
And if I could add,
Sure.
We obviously didn't do an RFP process. If we had done an RFP process, could we have come up with a different result, or were these the two companies that we'd be considering regardless?
Thank you, sir. Dan Gomez from Information Technology Bureau. So there's very few companies that, for the scale that we're talking about, who can provide the number of radios, type of radios, the quality, the feature sets that we're looking at, and that have experience with dealing with large agencies. So I think even had an RFP been issued, the same companies would have been competing for the business, because the standards we would have used would have still been the same, very high for the organization. I think that when we looked at the commodities contracts, they were both already pre-negotiated with the Department of General Services through the County of Los Angeles as well, and all our terms and conditions were already agreed upon. So we felt confident, as did the City Attorney's Office and others, that we were headed down the right path by utilizing those particular contracts to review. And since we were doing the added step of vetting both from a technical perspective, a user perspective, a field operation perspective, and then working together as a city family to try to figure out which was the actual best capability that met our operational needs.
That is correct. Melissa Uslon, General Services Department. To reiterate what Sergeant Gomez stated, there were two contract agreements established by the purchasing agent that allowed for both radio systems to be tested, and whichever test or whichever radio that was selected by ITA, LAPD, and LAFD met their needs was determined to the next step, which was a financing process. So as far as the purchasing agent contracts are concerned, there were two vehicles already in place for the end user departments to select which equipment best met their needs.
And there were questions about some feature, one or two features that weren't present in the Motorola that was raised by the other company. What's your response to that?
So the feature that I believe that they're referring to is the ability for the radios to operate in the 700 and 800 spectrum. They actually are in the radio. That's how they become multi-band radios. As part of the discounted offer that Motorola, they remove the dollar amount associated with it. So at first glance, it appears that you're not getting that feature, but in fact, you're getting it. It's just at no cost.
So those are the only missing features that you're aware of, and it was just a factor of how that was written up as opposed to actually missing the feature.
Yeah, that's my understanding from the letter that was received from Harris Corporation, sir.
Administrator, for the extensive work that you guys have done on this, and I'll thank all the departments, and I can't agree more. This is such a, as these past couple of weeks have shown, we want to get the best equipment promptly to both our first responders of LAFD and LAPD. And I know you guys put a lot of work into this new revision, and for the most part, it looks great. We got extra incentives like extension of the warranty. I saw that, and I just have one question. So between the previous and this contract, it looks like the newer one it's allowing for more radios, but it's a longer term payment in respect, so there's going to be more interest, but there's a lower so yeah, so this is, so if you could kind of break it down for me. So I know the cap is still at 64.5 million, but from the details of the report, well, there's no full details, but we get more radios, or more ability to get more radios, longer term payment, extra year, so I'm assuming there's interest, or if there's not, please clarify that, and then there's a lower discount, right? So we're getting less of a discount.
So, Natalie Brill, CAO's office, the way that the procurement was done is there was a 0% interest deal at $64.5 million. That amount included all the discounts that I think were discussed by the departments that Motorola bid on. So our job was to find a way of financing this project at $64.5 million at 0% interest. The rate that we're discussing in the report is a discount rate. This is the cost of Motorola to actually lend us the money to buy these radios. The way the discount rate works under federal law is there's a federal rate that they actually publish, and this is the November rate of 1.45%, and that's called by the federal government a discounted rate. It's their cost. So there's the amount that the $3.5 million that I discussed is the equivalent of 1.45% of this discount rate. This is the cost to them of lending us the money. But it's a federal rate. It's not a rate that I go to them open market and get. I can't get that rate. That's something that's published. And what they do is they say, okay, this is what it's costing you to borrow, 64.5, and we're good. And part of that is this discount rate that we need to deduct it from our taxes, and this is the amount that's for the actual equipment. So that's an internal accounting process that they go through. But it's still, I want to be clear about this, the procurement was 0% interest at $64.5 million. So that's a very technical kind of financing gobbledygook of how this is done, but this is something that's done a lot in the private sector, and so this is the rate that they gave us. And the CAO did its due diligence, looked at the federal rate, worked with our tax attorneys, and this is something that's more common, like I said, in the private industry, but it's something that there is a tax-exempt rate that we're using, and that's the 1.45%.
Ted Ross, General Manager at the ITA. In the opinion of the CAO during the negotiations, this was a preferred method of payment in which it still retained 0% interest spread at a lower amount per year, spread over, of course, a longer period of time. So this was actually preferable in their opinion than the original proposal.
Right. The useful life of the radios is 7 years. That's a federal guideline. It doesn't mean that's how long they're going to last. That's an IRS given amount, and so we decided to spread it over those 7 years. So instead of paying $12.9 million a year and deferring 2 years, because over that 2-year period, there's still a cost, right? It's a deferred cost, but there's still a cost to that. So we lowered the payments every year to $9.2 million.
Well, as long as 0%. It's great.
It is 0%.
Great deal. One other question. The recently negotiated contract, Motorola is guaranteeing us that maintenance and parts for the equipment, at least, they won't cancel any of this production or anything like that for 5 years.
It's 5 years after.
I can speak to it.
Yeah, so 5 years after, yeah.
When Ted Ross with ITA, when making an investment of this size, it's very important to us that we're not acquiring some type of device that in a few years will be considered obsolete. Right. And we're stuck coming back to council and council committee in a replacement process. So part of this, where assurance is given by Motorola that for the life of the radios plus 5 years, there are going to be parts and services available to us. So we are not buying an antiquated platform. We're buying a platform that will be robust and serviceable for the life of the contract plus additional 5 years.
So at the end of 7 years, after the end of 7-year payment, we could be guaranteed that there'll be parts, replacement, maintenance, all of that for additional 5 years after
Correct.
that.
Yes.
Great.
And we actually asked till February of 2030 for parts, whichever is later, right? So we'll basically have parts till 2030.
Okay, great. Thank you.
All right, Mr. Blumenfield.
Thank you. It's exciting and an important contract, so I'm thrilled that we're moving forward with something here. A couple of narrow questions. One, and you kind of answered this, but Harris is asserting that their radios are compatible with FirstNet, but that Motorola's radios are not. Just, is that true? And what are the implications?
Dan Gomez, Information Technology Bureau. So, sir, the FirstNet, if it's adopted by California, is the FirstNet committee is essentially providing a data platform, a way for data to come to devices. And the Harris radio does provide for a data portal. However, for radio communications are considered mission critical. And for police and fire, that simply means that every time I key the radio, that someone on the other side is going to hear me. And that's what voice radio does. That's different from data. I think we've all had the experience on our cell phones where we can't get to somebody or where data plan is not connected correctly and we lose data. It's unacceptable in a police and fire for mission critical. So these radios that we're procuring today and what we're looking at today and into the future through the federal mandate is that we're able to have this interoperability communication on the radio side. FirstNet is focusing on the data side. So from the police department, the fire department, we'll continue to look at FirstNet if it's adopted by California. And quite frankly, even if it's not, we're going to be looking at how best to use data to come to the departments and how we can utilize that. But as far as it being a primary radio communication, there is not a system out there today that is data-driven that could qualify as a mission-critical feature. So in one sense, they're correct that their device has it embedded. Motorola's has that as an option. We chose not to use that because that wasn't the primary consideration for the radios. The radio was voice communications.
So it's true that theirs has that as an option, but you're saying, but the implication is not important because that's not what the radio is being used for.
Correct. Today, that doesn't serve the function of either the police or the fire department.
But as we move, when do we expect FirstNet to be a requirement?
So their best guesses for the data side, not for the voice side, is about 5 years. That's the estimates coming directly from FirstNet.
So what does that mean happens in 5 years? I mean, are we being short-sighted by not including data as part of the radio? Are we going to then have to go bear an additional expense in 5 years from now to get that data requirement filled?
I would confidently say no, because the data piece of it, so for any technology, one is it has to be proven out. So even 5 years from now, if data becomes available, it's still not data for mission-critical communication. It's just data. It's an ability to provide something to either a radio or some other device. It doesn't have to be a radio. And then when something is introduced, even say these radios that we're purchasing today, we never buy them when they're brand new because we have to vet them. We have to make sure that they are going to meet the standards, that they work, that other agencies have purchased them and they've actually deployed them. Typically, any new technology that comes out, we wait anywhere from 1.5 years to 2 years to ensure that the system and the technology is going to be good for the organization, for both police and fire. So even at the onset, even if FirstNet were to introduce the ability to deliver data to us in 5 years and wait those additional 1.5 years, and even understanding what those standards will be at that point, it's very, very complicated. So the short answer to your question is that I feel very confident that what we're selecting today will serve us into the future and provide both from a police and fire, our operational needs. The data piece is not designed to be that mission critical, that push it every time and get help when you need it. That's not what it's designed to. And people from FirstNet themselves, who I sit with, will tell you the same thing.
And Scott Porter, CIO for the fire department. I'd like to just sort of reiterate, there's still a lot of uncertainty about what FirstNet actually means in the state of California. Is the state of California going to opt in? And if they do, what does that look like? For the fire department, our most critical immediate need is for the voice radio to be robust, well-tested, and complete with the features and functionality that we're looking for in this particular procurement. How the FirstNet comes to be and how we plan to use that on the data side, for us, likely won't be in our portables in the beginning anyway. It's going to be data in the vehicle. It's going to be data at the command post. It's going to be data coming to us over FirstNet in other ways as the FirstNet starts to roll out and we see what's available to us. That's why during our consideration of this, having data in the portable radio for us was not a primary feature. There were a lot of other primary features like interoperability and over-the-air programming and all the other things that we tested for, where we made a conscious effort or a decision to not incorporate a FirstNet requirement, because today it's very early to say what that even means to be FirstNet compatible. FirstNet's not even rolled out in the state. So we're confident that, to reiterate the police department, we're never the first with these things. We're not going to be the first to deploy some new voice over data feature. We're going to see it field tested by other agencies before we deploy it. So our immediate need, and immediate to me is this next 5 to 7 year span with these radios, is a solid voice radio system with the features that we have in here. So we're very confident from the fire side that FirstNet will be a factor for us, but just not in these radios.
You may have a couple of years, you may have another device, and then maybe it'll be 5 more years before they integrate the two, that
Absolutely.
Kind of thing.
And even FirstNet will tell you that. The FirstNet advocates this is a data-first program. Voice will come at some point later, or backup voice. These are our primary line radios. So they have to be absolutely single purpose in that sense for voice.
Okay. Another question. Harris was claiming that there wasn't a level playing field. They weren't provided with a clear list of performance requirements, whereas Motorola, as the current provider, had, quote-unquote, insider knowledge of LAPD and LAFD's requirements. And, I've been hearing that, so I just want to put that out there and see how you respond to that concern.
Dan Gomez, Information Technology Bureau. So throughout the process, we provided both Harris and Motorola equal time in terms of what we provided to them, in terms of the meetings that we had, the ability for each of the vendors to come out and do detailed presentations about their technology. The field testing was provided to both vendors. So I'm, again, very confident in the process that we provided to both vendors. Now, certainly, we have a radio network that's provided by Motorola. So, yes, I would assume that they understand that their radio network is what it is. It's a Motorola-provided network. But that isn't anything additional from the city. That's the fact that they own their own Motorola network. In every other way, it was exactly the same, provided the same opportunities for each vendor. We provide subject matter experts available to both vendors at all times. In fact, every time, as stated in other reports, when issues would occur, we would meet directly with the vendors to provide them direct feedback and have them understand what it is that we were looking for, even during the process, where typically, say, if an RFP had been done, we wouldn't have provided that kind of a level of detail after an RFP was started.
Okay. One last sort of technical question. Last spring, there was a lot of talk about the battery life issue, and that was a big piece of it, and the differences between the two products, and I don't see that in the new CAO report. So how was that issue resolved?
It's in the report. Back when we were looking at, I believe it's part of the warranty.
Okay.
The warranty does talk about battery life.
I think he's talking about, if I could, the battery life, which now before it was one battery. Now both PD and fire will each get two batteries, as well as the reconditioning chargers. So I think that addresses what you're talking about, the battery life.
Right.
The warranty that Natalie was talking about is now the battery has a 2-year warranty, as opposed to just the manufacturing warranty.
Correct a few items. Number one, the new negotiated deal allows for a second battery free of charge. Secondly, there's an extended warranty that didn't exist in the first agreement for the battery, so it's now 2 years. And third of all, the item when it comes to preventive maintenance and making sure that bulletins were very clearly understood and abided by refers to an item mentioned before back in the May timeframe in regards to corrosion on battery terminals. And so it's to ensure that preventive maintenance occurred that wouldn't further reduce. I think even a fourth item, too, is the way the smart chargers work. They actually help condition the battery so they actually get more life out of the battery. So there's a number of improvements on the battery side of it as a part of this agreement.
Yeah. I think the only last thing I would add is that what was identified in the original report is the duration of the battery. So LAPD chose to go with the longer life battery, which was the Motorola battery that had a 17-hour battery life. Even though we're still getting the 2 additional, it was important to have an operating system that would, our shifts are typically 12 hours, which really means about 14 hours. So we wanted to make sure that we were selecting a battery that would at least exceed that, which the Motorola radio did, and the Harris offering at the time of the original estimates only provided it for 10 hours. So the swap outs would have to happen during a shift.
Great. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Mr. Bloomfield. And I don't have any questions. I just want to say how pleased I am with this proposal. This is really a big step forward for public safety. Having the interoperability capabilities, having the uniformity across fire and police of using the exact same device with all the efficiencies that come with decreased maintenance costs and so forth, the redundancy that allows us is, I think, a huge step forward from where we are now. And I also want to echo my colleagues' thanks to the folks at the table for really working hard on developing the best possible proposal both for public safety and for the budget. This is, I think, a very cost-effective, important step forward. And I especially thank you, Mr. Rue, for throwing out praise to the chairs, but all of that goes to Mr. Englander, because Mr. Englander has taken a deep personal interest in this, has taken the deep dive into all the details of this, and has been personally engaged throughout the process in a way that has produced, I think, a much better package than where we started. And so for that, Mr. Englander, I thank you, and I turn it over to you.
I appreciate that. Thank you very much. And just one last thing I want to make sure is included, because all this talk of batteries got me to think. This is a very different process than what we're used to in terms of battery deployment, where we're going to be assigning perhaps 2 batteries to each officer with the radio or firefighter with the radio. The current deployment is we've got a hot and cold box. Essentially, take one, leave one. Most people take 2 and leave one, but as you need it, it's sitting outside of a kit room. This will stop that, prevent a lot of lost batteries, and probably ultimately a lot of savings as well because of it. I know many officers have 5 or 6 in their trunk of their car all the time, or their war bags, and so I think that will help. But in terms of the report back, the implementation and deployment report in 120 days, if ITA, if you can work with PD and fire on coming up with a plan on how those batteries are going to be deployed, whether each radio will be assigned 1 battery and the secondary will be in the kit room and they have to swap it, or however you're going to suggest doing it, if we can spell something like that out, I think it would be very helpful. So we could just include that in the report when it comes back. But with that, I want to thank my colleagues for the patience on this. It's been going on a year, and I know there has been countless hours of meetings within the departments to try to reconcile all of the various issues, and then funnel that down to the CAO for cleanup. And it's painstaking, but in the end, I think a much better delivery that we can all agree that can be modeled and for the future. So I want to thank all of you, and for my colleagues, and having the faith to have some breathing room and time. I know there's a lot of pressure when it comes to the backbone of public safety, which is communication. The most important thing a police officer or firefighter has on them at any time is not a hose, not a breath mask or oxygen tank or a gun. It's a radio, because on the other end of that are all the brothers and sisters to back you up, to get you out of that fire, to respond to help, whatever that might be. And they're always there without fail. And so if that radio fails, the whole system fails. Lives are at risk. So the pressure that's been put on to get this done, but I would not feel comfortable unless it was done correctly. So so I want to particularly give a special shout out to Ted Ross, who has really been riding shotgun and making sure, as our Chief Technology Officer for the entire city of Los Angeles, has really done a phenomenal job in working with police and fire on this. But thank you very much. Appreciate it, colleagues.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Englander. And with that, if there are no objections from the members of the two committees, it should be the action of the Committee of Budget and Finance and the Committee on Public Safety to accept the recommendations, to approve the recommendations of the CAO and to forward the matter to Council unless there's any objections. I see none, and that will be the action of both committees. Thank you all very much. Now, for the members of the public who are here, this was a kind of a unique special meeting. Typically, special meetings that are joint meetings of two committees are treated as a single meeting, but given the unusual nature of this meeting with only one joint item and multiple items that are to be considered by Budget and Finance only, I'm going to go ahead and take general public comment now for the joint meeting, and we will again at the conclusion of Budget and Finance. Please don't consider that a precedent. That's a courtesy to the public, just based on the special nature of this particular meeting. So I'm going to call first Sarah Jane Schwartz, and followed by Christine O'Brien, followed by Messrs. Previn, Herman, and Spindler. 1 minute each of general public comment.
Thank you for your courtesy.
My pleasure.
Sarah Jane Schwartz. I'm a 40-year resident of Hollywoodland, and I'm here asking you all for your help because our Councilman Rue sadly has failed us, whether there was a fire or not. There's still time to act, though, Councilman. The dangerous conditions in the neighborhoods below the Hollywood sign created by the city are a scandal involving gross negligence. During the past week, during some of the most dangerous fire conditions in memory, we had expected our councilman to finally step up. Instead, he failed to put into effect previously agreed upon measures by LAFD and DOT, the most important being to close off this inappropriate and dangerous area to tourists. At least Councilman Labange would have shut it down our neighborhood because he did so when it was dangerous. Finally, putting up a few electronic signs is too little too late. An LA fire captain said visiting our neighborhood, people will die up here if there's a fire. Every day we witness smokers by our homes, even during red flag days, while the rest of California is burning. You should be leading the charge to keep your constituents and visitors safe. If public safety should be put first, if not now, when?
Thank you very much. Our next speaker is Christine O'Brien, followed by Mr. Previn.
Hello, Christine O'Brien. I'm a property owner and member of the Hollywoodland Homeowners Association, a group of 575 hillside homes with substandard streets without sidewalks. We're in a very high fire hazard severity zone. We are also the only residential community surrounded by three sides of significant ecological area. Within this area, adjacent to the former Hollywoodland sign, is the main communication tower for the City of Los Angeles. To continue to promote this area in the Hollywood sign as a hiker tourist destination attraction is beyond common sense, logic, and budget allocations. Please take measures to eliminate this promotion. Enforce the fire laws. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Previn, Mr. Herman, and Mr. Spindler.
Thank you. It's Eric Previn from CD2. I'm really disappointed in that last item, and Ted Ross should resign rather than be lauded by Mr. Englander in that sloppy manner. This guy and all of them were effectively pushing for the Motorola deal, where there was absolutely no competitive bidding. I think you both know, and Mr. Falbo, who's seated over here, that it's a state requirement to have competitive bidding. And this endless supply of malfeasance, is the best way to put it, is intolerable. And paying all those lobbyists to get it done by having a nephew of the biggest lobbyist in town on this very committee who's pushing through the deal, stinks to high heaven in all fairness. And I would simply say we need to do a much better job, because if we want to be a modern city like Mayor Garcetti is constantly reminding us we have to be fair and open. The FirstNet thing is a significant detail. This is, I think, a major national program that is coming, and the 5-year, 2-year split that Mr. Bloomfield pointed out.
Thank you. And next speaker is Mr. Herman, followed by Mr. Spindler.
So 42 USC 1983. Why is it that we still have Jose Huizar and Mitchell Englander's sexual harassment not dissolved? They should quit, they should be removed, and they should stop fucking with women in City Hall. The same way the Los Angeles Police Department and their cadet program must stop fucking young children. In all my life, I cannot believe grown men take children to their homes to fuck at barbecue parties. It's disgusting, Mr. T. Fank, to the left of me. You've heard me in my outcries at police commission. You've heard me outcry publicly say, stop fucking women at City Hall. Now it's become an epidemic. You know what that means, Englander? Keep your legs tied to your shoes and stop fucking with women, Mitchell Englander, and your sexual harassment, and Jose Huizar.
Mr. Spindler.
So what we got is, it's very good news for everybody, a 116-page First Amended complaint in LACV 1700250. So your lovely council president is going to be sued personally for punitive damages. You'll be getting this real soon. So we're also going to have 2 other parties that seek leave to amend. Sergeant Morris is sitting here today. He's going to be one of the proud defendants will seek leave to amend. And then another interesting part is that your city attorney, Stefan Fabel, I believe is engaged in a conspiracy under Civil Code Section 52.1 to, quote, intimidate, harass, and coerce people to stop them from speaking in Brown Act meetings in violation of federal and state law. So that is also going to be a new lawsuit. So again, in February, you could have settled the whole thing, but instead, you fucked up.
All right, with that, we will adjourn the joint meeting and commence the regular meeting of the Budget and Finance Committee. And members, I typically would have recommended items 6, 8, 9, 10, 11, and 12 for consent approval. We do have cards on some of those matters, so I'm going to call up for multiple item public comment, Messrs. Previn, Herman, and Spindler.
Thank you. It's Eric Previn from CD2. You've got an item 9 on your agenda, which is for Mike Fior. Fauble works for him. He wants to establish, the city attorney does, a couple of trust funds. One for victims and one for something called, I think it's called Community Justice Initiative Trust Fund. Anybody can give up to $5,000, $4,999. If you go over $5,000, you have to ask Mr. Wesson or put it on agenda. But what about if 100 people do it because they say this is a great way to get city attorney attention or the lack thereof? I mean, this is a bad area, okay? This is a end run around the Ethics Commission, who is doing an outstanding job of nothing at the moment. They've got a 4-year audit program, which we wrote about a couple weeks ago in City Watch. I don't know what to tell you about that one. That one should be thrown back for sure. Outfront Media deserves a great deal of credit for campaign donations. They have provided dozens, $13,000 just in the last couple of years. Now, what they're getting in exchange is a gigantic refund of $100-something thousand. They are not alone. We have PMK, one of the big Hollywood PR firms, also getting an enormous refund. And as Mr. Englander will remind us, Fox Broadcasting, just what are we doing? This is a weird apportionment over there. We did an audit. Guess what? You're our treasured partner. You gave $13,000 recently, so you just got a lot of money back. That does not mesh well with the lack of transparency, which has been explained to me by the Office of Finance and Legal Writing, saying that no, the public may not see what people are paying, and it's because there might be a competitive advantage to the company. They might lose a competitive advantage. It's absurd in the most egregious way, because we need to know what these things are about. There's no backup information. There's no, Mr. Blumenfield, if you would like to explain the out front detail of what the refund is about, we would be delighted to hear your technical detail. There's no way to know. No, they don't publish anything. You got some cannabis employees coming in at item number 5.
Thank you, Mr. Previn. Mr. Herman, followed by Mr. Spindler.
So you hear on item 9 how Mike Fuhr, motion by Krikorian and Wesson, to establish a victim service. Well, Wayne Spindler is a victim. Wayne Spindler is a victim of community injustice by the Bain Act. Along with item number 3, watch the video, the beating of Mr. Who, other than Steve Brown versus the city of Los Angeles. Los Angeles police beat the fuck out of a man the same way back in 2008 when you arrested me and you threw me against the wall with handcuffs because I suffered a disability from a work-related fucked up injury and I'm now disabled. Is that the way you treat people in custody? TMU, Threat Management Unit? What about the slap? That's what you did. You slapped me in the motherfucking face on matters arising from incidents involving members of the Los Angeles Police Department on October 26th. Good job, Steve Brown. Fuck them to the bank. In addition to that, to the trip and fall incident, I'm going to hold you, Mr. Krikorian, responsible for disruption of my life, threatening me in public meetings by sending the Sergeant of Arms to coerce me to shut the fuck up. And why do I say that? Because I'm going to file my small claims of $10,000 against you for the record for violation of the Brown Act, violation of my civil rights as a disabled person, and I'm putting it on record for the budget. So when we go before mediation, it will be resolved, and you will solve the problem as opposed to bring litigation against this city by the Department of Justice for the welfare of your mental health and my mental health. You stupid motherfucker. I reserve your 1 second, dick.
Spindler.
So what do we get here? Steve Brown beaten the fuck out by the LAPD. You gotta keep beating people up. Why? You have handcuffs, you have drones, you have helicopters, you have tanks, and you're still doing it old school, whipping the slaves on the fucking LA City plantation with the slave owner bitches, the city of Los Angeles LAPD. When are you going to stop fucking beating us white niggers? When? When are you going to stop harassing us with sergeants of arms? When are you going to stop beating up people that just want to sit on a park bench or sit on and have a beer or rest? What the fuck is that? And you guys don't do nothing but pay attorneys to keep silent. The right to remain silent by fucking settling cases in confidential matters. So that when we go to the state bar, they won't release the records claiming it's confidential. So that means Mike Fuhr could continue to fuck the city's taxpayers with this unbelievably ridiculous litigation strategy of harassment and intimidation of plaintiffs' attorneys and the plaintiffs. And a lot of these plaintiffs' attorneys know you motherfuckers have been fucking harassing them and tailing them and their wives and their kids to try to get them to drop these fucking lawsuits. That's why you got to have Century City law firms with 50 attorneys on staff. That's why you motherfuckers sit there like the fat-headed Jew motherfuckers that you are, beating white niggers, beating black niggers, beating brown niggers to keep your plantation alive. This shit is going to stop. CC 52.1 of the Bain Act 42 USC, fuck you.
All right, members, I'd like to propose that items 6, 8, 9, 10, 11, and 12 be approved and advanced to council if there are no objections. Seeing none, that will be the action of the committee. That will bring us then to item number 5. No, you know what? Before we do that, I would like to note that public comment on items. Sorry, before I do that, why don't I go ahead and call up Ms. Schwartz and Ms. O'Brien on item number 2, please.
We have 2 minutes, right?
1 minute.
Oh, I thought it was...
It's 1 minute per item.
Oh, all right.
Please wait a minute because our meeting is being disrupted by Mr. Herman and Mr. Spindler as they leave. Sorry, Mr. Spindler, it was Mr. Herman. Go right ahead.
Thank you. Sarah Jane Schwartz. The stables have always been a feature of Hollywood land since it was founded in 1923, way before the surrounding land was donated to Griffith Park in the 1940s. Our neighborhood loves the stables. They are part of our natural habitat, and the environment would not be the same without them. We hope you grant them the greatest leniency under the law. There are 2 private swimming pools encroaching on parkland. Their owners have not been pursued. We urge you to apply the law equally to everyone and therefore drop the encroachment action against the stables. We hope you'll work with them, not against them. They're the only enterprise acting responsibly in Hollywoodland, in contrast to the amusement park the city has illegally established in our neighborhood, where residents are forced to confront smokers instead of the city doing its job. The stables has been here for almost 100 years. If the city amusement park were a private enterprise, it would have been shut down in 30 seconds. Please respect the stables. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. O'Brien.
Christine O'Brien, if you're going to consider the encroachment for the Sunset Stables, please be fair. There are 2 swimming pools on parkland, one at 3020 Holly Ridge Drive and the other at 3390 Deronda. Rules cannot be selective.
Thank you very much. All right, members, that closes public comment on all agenda items, and we will proceed next to item number 5. Mr. Williams, if you could read that item as they come on up.
Item number 5 is the CAO report on staffing and necessary resources for the Department of Cannabis Regulation.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Claudia Aguilar with the CAO's office. Before you is a report that primarily deals with the staffing required for the Cannabis Department for this fiscal year. As mentioned in the report, the department received 5 positions in the adopted budget, as well as 2 interim positions through council. Assuming that the department receives 150 applications for cannabis, they will have sufficient revenue to offset the cost of those positions. However, an area of concern is the pre-licensing inspections and investigations portion, which the department neither has the resources nor the subject matter expertise. One of the possibilities that has been recommended was the use of the police commission's investigation division to assume those responsibilities. As you've noted, we have not made any recommendations in our report. We are asking this for note and file, but at the table, we do have representatives from both Police Commission and from the Department of Cannabis to address any issues related to the staffing. We also are reporting on, as we've reported a few times on revenue, we at this point still cannot give you any numbers on the revenue, but because of some of the changes that have just recently been adopted, including the caps that will be set by the community plans, we are fairly confident we will be able to report back in the next couple of months to see how those numbers will eventually affect our revenue. If you have any questions, we're here to answer them.
Okay. Not really specific questions because there's not a lot to ask specific questions about at this point, and I think that points out part of my significant frustration on where we are right now, that we're advancing forward on very complex policy-making decisions that will set a course for this city and maybe the rest of the country. And we still really don't have a clear sense of what Ms. Packer's staffing needs are going to be going forward, what LAPD's staffing needs, or building and safeties or any of the other fire, the many other departments that are going to be impacted, nor what that will cost, nor what revenues we will realize to be able to offset those costs. And particularly as people are envisioning setting aside part of the revenues derived from this industry for special purposes. And so I think this report points up exactly the concerns that I've had around those areas. I'm pleased that in the next few months we'll be able to do a more precise job of it, but of course we will have already committed ourselves to a path by then. And so it's no one's fault. It's just the nature of where we are, but I think it's important to continue to remind everyone in the city family as well as the public that an awful lot of what we're doing is without a full range of knowledge about its fiscal impacts. And I don't think I can say much more about the report than that at this point. Oh, with the one exception that you did describe the revenue generation that would likely be realized given a certain number of assumed applications. That would obviously, well, no, it's not obvious. Let me ask you. Those projections will be impacted if we were to make changes on the appeal fee with regard to those applications, which is something that has been discussed as a possibility. Is that right?
No, the 150 applications refers to the Proposition D applications, so that revenue will still maintain at the same level that will cover the department's positions.
Okay.
What the appeals fee will change, if that's no longer full fee recovery, that would that will cause us problems going forward because as Ms. Packard only has a very minimal staff right now, we would be impacted in both being able to process those appeals and the cost at least $4,500 for each field and general fund subsidy.
So rather than the appeal process being full cost recovery, in fact, it will be significantly subsidized, and that subsidy alone will likely spark more appeals. So it's a diverging vector then of affordability. Is that fair to say?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Ms. Packer, you want to add anything else, or Mr. Teefank at this point, or should we go into questions?
Kat Packer, Executive Director, Department of Cannabis Regulation. The only thing that I wanted to add, I understand folks' frustrations in the moment right now not knowing. I share those frustrations. I just met this morning with the mayor and his cabinet giving a presentation as to what is to come, what the city council moved forward with last week, bringing in general managers from other departments so that they understand the scope of this regulatory framework that we're moving forward. In the interim, understanding that it is unlikely that the department is going to be appropriated new positions within the next couple of months. So have been talking to folks from the mayor's office about pulling folks to support the department in the interim, just so you're aware that those conversations are happening so that it is not just going to be the very few number of folks who are in the department currently.
So I appreciate your being proactive and trying to fill the gap in that way. Obviously, and you know this, the problem with that approach is that takes work hours away from other services to our constituents that are already being underserved. And so I don't think to any of us could that possibly be a satisfactory solution. It may be something that needs to be done in the short term, but I think even if that is done, the cost of doing so needs to continue to be budgeted into our cannabis program and ensure that we recapture those costs, even if it's done on an interim basis by staff shifting like that. So my goal is going to be always that to the extent legally possible, every penny of expense related to this industry is paid for by this industry, without exception. That's going to be my goal. So, okay. With that, Mr. Teefank, anything you wanted to add before we go to questions?
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. The concern I have from our Commission Investigation Division is our current limited staffing. I have 9 civilian employees assigned to my permit unit. Of that, I have 2 vacancies. I have a supervisor, and the balance of the unit. 2 of those people are administrative clerks that do not leave the office. So all of our field inspections now are done by a supervisor and 4 people. And we process 55 different types of permits currently. This is all done by civilians. Sworn personnel are not involved in any of this pre-inspection or licensing process. They do investigation of applicants who have a negative criminal background. So they would not be utilized in any way in this kind of situation. For me personally, I think that utilizing sworn police officers to do an investigation of a licensing or a permit that is still a violation of Schedule 1 of the federal law becomes difficult to deal with. That's where I think the civilian employees are appropriate. I think within the DCR is the appropriate place to have them, and would do anything we could to support them as they get their unit up and running, but not want to take on that primary responsibility of doing this because it will impact the various permits that we issue to let people get into the business world.
Thank you. Mr. Englander, questions?
Yeah, a couple things. First of all, I appreciate the complexities and where we're at today. It's I won't say uncharted territory, but it certainly is of this magnitude, and it is here. With that, the bulk of the time that has been committed is working out that regulatory framework, which has, for the most part, I think been done and done as well as could be. With having that under our belt, if you will, my concern from the beginning of this has been, well, what happens after that? What happens when the green light turns on? And we turn that corner on January 1st in terms of enforcement, in terms of making sure that we have the tools and the personnel in place, because we saw what happened with Prop D. There were supposed to be 135 around there, and we ended up with about 1,000, and no body and to really do the enforcement. And it became, and to this day, becomes very complex, just enforcing what we have, yet alone this whole new set of criteria and laws and licensing. My concern, too, is that of the chairs, that if we move any personnel from any other departments, every department is on the civilian side and even the sworn side is spread very, very thin. We've committed, as you all know, to try to restore positions that were lost during the recession, during the ERIP process of early retirement, during hiring freezes and managed hiring, and we're still not there in many departments for a number of reasons. One of those hurdles being trying just to hire in the first place. It's very complicated. Personnel has a backlog in a lot of different agencies, and trying to prioritize what's being done. But this is now, and this is around the corner, so we've got to utilize what we have. What I would like to see is if there are any departmental moves, even if they're temporary loans, even if they're interim positions, those reports regularly going back to a committee, either budget, so we can make sure that we're, particularly now, it's really important as we start looking towards April in budget discussions, and so we know where we're at and we have our hand on it, but at a minimum, the personnel committee, if not both. And so if there are positions that are either on loan, I'd like to see those documented and brought back, so we don't find out at the end of the year or after the budget process that we're short in all these other departments, and here's why, even though there's good reason, but ultimately we're responsible for it as well, and so we want to make sure we have that communication and it's documented, if that's okay.
I think it's a great idea, and in fact, there may need to be adjustments in the FSR to help compensate for some of those changes. So I think it's appropriate that we have that reported back to this committee.
In terms of looking at the CEO report and who can take on an initial phase 1, if you will, and that being CID, and I know there's been some discussions back and forth on that. First and foremost, no matter what our position is individually or not, recognizing the federal issue of it still being on a schedule one report, and having law enforcement do enforcement for pre-license checks or even inspections, I understand how for some folks that can be a concern. It's not for me. The city council, well, let's even take a step back. The voters have spoken here in California, and the city council has spoken. We're moving forward, and it's one city, and we're all in this together. So what we need to make sure of is that the most important element, in my opinion, on this entire initiative, the most important is public safety, by far. I mean, what we're talking about here, these aren't ice cream parlors. And so we need to make sure that we have the right people in place day one, and we don't. We don't have the opportunity, the time, or the resources to hire them yet. So what do we have today to work with? The best that I can think of, the best and the brightest in the city that does this type of work with 55 other types of licenses, whether they're massage parlors, whether they're valet parkers, whether they're nightclubs, anything that would sort of fall into specialized categories of business license and operations, if you will. It's not a flower shop, but it's something that has unique conditions and restrictions and has to be monitored as such, that have safety requirements, that have safety checks, that have those kinds of unique elements, is the Commission Investigation Division. And that's, to me, where it makes the most sense. I'm glad the CAO recognized that in the report as well. Now, having said that, I realize that it's understaffed too, like every other department. I think it is important to give some direction. I'm not comfortable in leaving this committee not knowing who's taking that enforcement tool day one. Now, that may not be permanent, but I am certainly not comfortable in saying we'll figure it out and we'll get a report back sometime in February, March, or April. We need to know January 1st that there is a department that has the know-how and knowledge, maybe not the bodies, but the know-how to implement rules and regulations of unique businesses. In my mind, there isn't a better one. And there's not a better executive director of that body in the city to do that. And what we've got to do then is figure out what does that cost, so it's built into cost recovery on those fees. But there isn't another department, and we don't have the personnel. And we're moving forward. The train has left the station, and it's a locomotive, and it's coming fast. And so that's sort of where I'm at.
If I may respond to that, sir. I understand it. I think you know me. All of you know me. I'm a team player. I get things done. But with that said, I don't know what to get done here. I don't know what the pre-licensing requirements are. If the forms are in place, the whole system has to be constructed, it appears to me. The first time I see it is in the CEO report late Friday evening. So if I'm going to be tasked with it to do it, then we'll be tasked with doing everything. We'll go in and see what the system is. We'll work to set up the system, not our system, whatever system they want. But that is going to have an impact on our ability to issue the other permits that we issue in the city of Los Angeles. You just have to understand that. We'll get it done, but that's going to have an impact. And if we're going to get additional resources, the resources that I would want would be to come to our permit section to help us do our job, because the people I'm going to have do this are the experienced people that know how to do permits.
Right.
So it becomes the one, you pay me now, you pay me later, but we've got to get the people up to the plate, get them trained quickly. I would rather train the people that the Cannabis Commission is going to hire so they can take it over quickly than just have my people continue to do it. So what I would like to see happen, if I'm going to be saddled with implementing this, is with the assistance of the Personnel Committee, direct Personnel Department to get an accelerated hiring of this class of employee that they're going to use, so that we can begin getting them on board, get them trained as quickly as possible so we can back out of it. There's got to be a strategic plan of implementation, and I don't know if there is one.
And this is my point. Look at that. Right out of the gate, you already know exactly what questions to ask, where it needs to go, how the framework needs to be set up. I think you've just sold yourself on
it's coming to me,
you
it's
are
not gonna fail.
absolutely the one to because you've done this. You've set it up, and we've created new, unique types of licensing requirements. We just did the whole massage parlor ordinance because the state finally allowed us and gave us authority under local control to implement new rules and regulations. I mean, you are the expert, quite frankly, in the city that understands setting up new systems and complexities with who better to work with CAT to figure out exactly what that pre-licensing requirements, how that intake should be, and then certainly if there's a mechanism to transfer and have an expedited hiring. Again, this is going to affect anybody who touches it. Every department, planning and building and safety, they will have to be on board with this. There's a lot of zoning requirements and regulations that are going to have to be looked at on each one of these. There's a lot of people that are going to be impacted, and that's included in that report that I suggested we get back, which is if you have a burden and you have personnel spending even a minute on this, it's captured in that report, whether loan to or working under, all the time spent, and so we can make sure that you're made whole, knowing full well that everybody's going to have an impact. But the bottom line is, it's a really tough decision to say we're going to be slowing down city services in some capacity in some various departments in order to make public safety a priority, number one, and making sure that this rolls out correctly so people are safe. Yeah, I mean, we're the ones that are going to have to explain that to our constituents and businesses that are calling, and why some things might be taking a little longer, because we have to make this a priority in terms of making sure we get it right. So when somebody goes to unlock their doors and open for business, it's safe for that community, and this is critically important to get right out of the gate from the start. So I appreciate that, and I think just your opening statement on that just now closed the deal in my mind that there's nobody better. So thank you,
Mr. Gritz.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I'm not sure exactly what we're hearing from you. Are you willing to do this if we need to?
I work for the City of Los Angeles, and you are the City of Los Angeles. So if we are requested to do it, I don't know that the council can direct the commission to take action since they're an independent body over the LAPD. But I think that we can implement it. If that's the direction we're going to go, then we can make it happen. Just the understanding, sir, that there is an impact on our current business model that we do every day. Gearing up a new business model for which we have no expertise, we have no system in place just to get that together, is going to have an impact on what we do every day. We'll try to mitigate that impact we do every day to get this up and running, but I would hope that we can do this in a very accelerated time frame and get the support from the city personnel department to assist the cannabis department in getting the resources they need in an expeditious manner. Therefore, we can get this up and running and transition it to them because they'll have the staff. If that personnel recruitment piece is going to take a year, then we're really going to be bogged down quite a bit. So that would be.
And I'll certainly do what I can personally to help nudge that along. I don't know how much the budget process is a factor, but frankly, we should budget what we need and move as quickly as we can to get the department up and running. So how much of that is a factor? Are we under budgeted for what you can do, or is it more a question of how quickly you can get people hired and trained?
It's more of a question of how quickly we can get folks hired. I anticipate that I will be able to fill all of the positions within the department that have been allocated no later than the beginning end of February. But as it currently holds, the department only has 5 positions, and in actuality, for this department to be fully functional, able to respond on a regular basis to constituents, to customers, we probably need to have a staff of 30 to 40 folks when we're talking about these community plans where we'll probably see around 1,000, 1,200 businesses.
So do you need more now, or can you not digest them that quickly yet?
even if you gave them to me now, I don't know that I'd be able to fill those positions immediately.
Okay, good to know. I also wonder whether we've caused ourselves a problem by front-loading very heavy inspections and application processing requirements, and if there is any way for us to adjust that so we're not behind the 8 ball from the beginning.
So thank you, Councilmember Koretz, for pointing that out. I do think that it's important to note that for Prop D businesses that are already operating, it should be a fairly seamless process for those folks to be able to move forward and get their provisional license. So the department will be able to issue provisional licenses to Prop D businesses prior to them going through this pre-licensing inspection. So it's not going to hold those folks up. It's going to be everyone who comes behind them. Now, these Prop D operators will be first in line to get those pre-licensing inspections, which will, of course, move everyone else behind in their wait time for these pre-licensing inspections. But it's not as if the process won't start without the pre-licensing inspection. The concern that I think that council members have and that I share is that there's going to be a period of time very soon where we will have businesses that have been operating that have not been inspected.
Right. Well, my first and main concern is that we don't go dry, as it were, on January 1st and have no access for medical marijuana patients. So what you're saying is it's very clear that won't happen on January 1st.
No.
The existing dispensaries that are quote, legal, will be able to continue providing medical marijuana to their patients.
Yes.
Well, that's important.
May I just, on that point, though, Mr. Koretz, one of the concerns, though, is where are they getting their supply if we don't have licensed grows, if we don't have testing in place, if we're not quite clear on what we're doing on transportation yet. How are they impacted? How are the existing Prop D compliant medical marijuana dispensaries impacted in their ability to continue that service if we don't have that piece in place yet?
And I know you're not asking me, but I think my
No, I wasn't. I was asking
but
because
my answer would be you'll have immaculate conception the way we do now. Better to have them open than not open, but it's still obviously the same absurd situation we've had where if you're cultivating and you're caught, you could be have your marijuana confiscated and shut down and prosecuted. So we obviously need a better way in the interim to deal with that, but we obviously won't have it by January 1st.
This is the case, and I do think that the market that exists right now is going to be severely impacted by our inability to move non-retail operators into this system day one. For me, what it will mean is a couple of things. One, we'll end up in this situation with immaculate conception with the cannabis. I do think that because there's a new licensing scheme that's on board, people are going to be more resistant to bringing in other operators. You now have this golden ticket. I'm not going to waste my golden ticket on an operator that's not a part of the system. So what that means to me is that the product placement is going to change severely in the city of Los Angeles. Those products that you're normally seeing on the shelves in these dispensaries, if they are not on board in a licensed facility, those products are going to have to come off the shelf. What we'll see is probably a shift to flower as opposed to edibles and manufactured products, because a lot of these Prop D facilities, they actually do have cultivation on site. It's not nearly enough to sustain the market. But in order if a business is trying to be 100% compliant day one, what they're probably going to do is try and get all of those products off the shelf, which, by the way, might cause folks some concern, because what we'll see happening very soon is that those manufacturers are going to try and sell as much product as possible right now before January 1st. Knowing that those products are not going to be on legal shelves after January 1st. So what I think we'll see here in the city of Los Angeles is that we're going to shift, and the market is going to go almost completely flower in order for folks to be able to accommodate and stay stay compliant, and that's not necessarily the best for patients and consumers who need a diversity of products available.
No, in fact, there are a number of conditions that need to be time released, and some of the edibles and other choices are clearly the right choice for those, and the flower product is the wrong choice for them. So we ideally don't want to put ourselves in a situation where we're not allowing patients to access the proper medication. I don't know, do we have any way to get around that?
Not with our current framework. This is something that I believe the City Council considered at length amongst a number of other things, but one of the things that I think that we tried to very strategically do was try and wrap our heads around how we were going to move operators who the city has had no legitimate relationship with into this market, and that compromise as it's moved forward with this phase 2 of licensing for non-retail businesses who can come on board after Prop D. Now, there's nothing that says that during the 60-day window in which Prop D businesses can operate, there's nothing that says that we can't open that processing for other businesses, but because of the limited capacity of the department, it really makes sense for us to try and move forward with a phased system as opposed to trying to do all types of cannabis activity all at once. And so right now it's currently in the discretion of the department when to phase in that second and third phase of licensing. But as capacity stands, we really need to prioritize Prop D folks who have been legitimate, who are under the guise of our current system.
So we aren't considering some method to start providing the actual cultivation and transport and allowing the product to actually get to medical marijuana dispensaries. Because that's my concern. I don't care how soon all the different products are available for recreational. I don't think that has a big impact on people's lives. But if we cut back on some of the medical tools, we could be impacting the lives and health of some of our residents. So I don't know if there's any other way to look at it, if there's a way to ease up on enforcement during this period, if there's some way to get a variety of products to the medical dispensaries. I would hope that we would at least look at that, and whether easing up on the early inspections was helpful. I would think that might be more valuable if it let the system get into place a little more quickly.
Mr. Blumenfield. Thank you. First, I agree with my colleagues about we need to have our eyes wide open in terms of the costs of all of this and how it impacts other functions of the city, whether it's inspection or anything else. So in as much as we track all that, that's critically important. But in terms of getting this done quickly, a question about, I know with the licensing software, we contract out that to some extent. Have other cities engaged the private sector with the inspection process? Is there a way to take this on a much larger scale, utilizing the private sector, and has that been done in other areas?
I've seen certain components of what we call a plan check or a pre-inspection be diverted to third-party vendors.
For a short window, I'm not saying forever, but yeah.
Yes, particularly for things like live scans. I haven't seen any types of on-site inspections being carried out by third parties in other jurisdictions. But definitely some of the ancillary functions of the department to make sure that things are more streamlined. I have seen other jurisdictions go ahead and allow third parties to come on board and help out and assist.
I mean, in as much as we have a strong interest in getting as much done as fast as we can in terms of the cultivate, because all the pieces don't work unless all the pieces are being inspected and brought on board. We have a strong interest in getting it all done quickly, and as you're saying, there are aspects that have been done, so I just would encourage looking into the possibility of leveraging the private sector to some extent. And I've heard different things, and you know much better than I do about how that can be done. But it presents its own set of challenges. But I think we ought to look at it for sure. And then a question about the appeal fee. Right now, we're assuming a $100 fee, or we're assuming the full cost recovery?
The Rules Committee report went forward with an amendment to change the non-applicant fee to $100. The Budget and Finance report goes forward with the full cost recovery amount. So that will be something that would be voted on Wednesday's council meeting.
It would be useful to get the information if they're, in terms of cost of the middle ground. And I don't mean just in terms of the picking a number between 100 and 4,000, but in terms of some of the creative stuff we do with other land use things, such as a $100 fee for appeals within 500 feet or 1,000 feet of the facility, so that you create that low cost fee for anybody who's actually an impacted neighbor. But for just the competitive, everybody's going to be going after everybody else in this because of the competitive nature of this, you make those kinds of appeals more costly. And one way to screen the difference is proximity. So in as much as when we vote on it, whenever it comes forward, it would certainly be helpful to me to know how the cost rolls out on some of those interim measures, 500 feet, 1,000 feet. And I know it's only estimates, but somehow we were able to do that with the other land use things. Does that make sense? Is that something that can be put together?
This will be in council on Wednesday, so I'm not sure.
You got 48 hours, right? Just a couple of, well, back of the envelope.
To be clear, what we'll be voting on the $100 is to instruct CAO to report back on options on changing that, or at least that's what Budget and Finance requested. So I think the agenda item is to do that. So we won't be approving a $100 fee. We'll be asking for a report back.
Well,
I think I'm correct on that. But in any event, since you raised the issue, it's very clear to me that these appeals will not be done by neighbors so much as they will be by competitors who will go out and find a neighbor to do it, just as we see happen with plaintiffs' land use attorneys who go and find people now to be the complaining person, and it will be a profit-driven enterprise, and we will be subsidizing that profit-driven enterprise of appeals if we were to reduce it to a $100 fee. So one of the things that I'm going to suggest that the CAO and perhaps the CLA look at is the possibility of having a reduced fee only in the circumstance where a certain number of petition signatures are gathered by residents of Los Angeles, whatever that number is, so that it's truly a grassroots appeal and not a AstroTurf appeal that's being done by a competing marijuana business, for example.
By the way, and that's the discussions we're actually having in planning and land use on all appeals, because we've seen that occur, and so we're actually having the same discussion on how we're supplementing right now. The average appeal, for example, on a land use case right now is about $15,000 in city costs, and so we're trying to figure out how to make it fair with making sure that the local residents have a voice. And so that's one of the very things we're discussing there, is that same issue.
Yeah, not only do those appeal costs not go away just because we reduce the fee, but in fact they increase, because if the fee is less, there's going to be more appeals, and so that means more work hours by staff that's devoted to that instead of doing the work of oversight and regulation and everything else that they do.
In fact, the way it's written right now, just to file an appeal, you can live anywhere. You can file an appeal from another state. You can file an appeal. So we have to really make sure we get that part right as well.
Sorry, I didn't mean to take you off course, but just on that one.
Yeah, no, I mean that's the main. That was the end of my questions. But in terms of wanting to see that, there's a whole number of possibilities. Like you're mentioning, you could do the petition. You could do the proximity issue, and I'd be curious how that, if there is a way to do back of the envelope before Wednesday, even if it's not finalized, just to get a sense of what that would do. Because for me, there is a appealing aspect in terms of giving that preference to the local folks, even if I understand that the companies would solicit somebody within that area, but it does make it harder, and it does create more of a genuine voice for the neighbors.
So let's go, Mr. Kretz, one more point, and then we'll come back to you to bring us home, Mr.
Yeah, following up on the same point, I think what we've been talking about now with a $100 appeals fee almost literally incentivizes every single marijuana dispensary or business in the entire city to be appealed. So I think we need a thoughtful process. I think we need a higher number and a requirement of getting a petition from neighbors to even file it, say within the 500 feet radius, and that petitions be circulated by residents within the 500 foot radius. If we don't really restrict it dramatically, no matter what, every single dispensary will be appealed, and I don't see how that would be advantageous to the city. I think we'd be tied up chasing our tails in a way that nobody's really anticipated and thought through. So I think we need a number that's high enough not to beg people to file an appeal in every single case, and a process whereby competitors can't really drive it.
Okay, and so, in taking this, trying to sort of land this discussion to everything that was suggested, try to put it to some context into a motion that comes, something that we can forward out of this committee. And I think from a lot of the comments that came from all of you as well as my colleagues, maybe it makes sense. I think it makes sense to move forward with to have CID to begin the pre-licensing process, working with the DCR, and then further for CID to work out a transition and training plan once an expedited hiring plan has been put into motion. Further, to have the CAO to reconcile the cost to true up the fees, including the initial phase of CID and training. If that makes sense. And I can walk you through that if you got questions, but I think at least it turns the corner into January of having a foundation, of capturing those costs, of having an expedited hiring plan moving forward, and it codifies that, although that will have to still go through personnel, of having CID work in coordination with DCR as those employees come online to be able to hand it off and train as well. And that's what I would suggest.
Yeah, and I support that suggestion. I would add to that the committee receive and file the current report and also request a supplemental report from the department and from the CAO prior to January 1st. Well, no, let's prior to January 15th. That will build upon this information with more precise staffing needs to meet the objectives that were just described by Mr. Englander.
So to have the CAO and DCR and CID to come back with a joint report by the end of the year, or beginning of January.
It's not going to happen by the end of the year, so let's say by the middle of January.
So the report that's going forward on Wednesday already includes a direction for us to report back, which includes PD and fire. So if you want, we can merge this in with that report back, so you don't need to do a separate.
That's fine. And I'll put that motion into writing so we can submit it. But if we could vote on it as oral motion, that would be great.
We can, and right now there is, we'll request a placeholder on the council agenda for consideration at the same time as we consider the other cannabis matters to consider that in council as well. So I'll second that motion if there's no objection. That will be the action of the committee. And anything else on this, members?
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
I'm sorry, I just want to make sure I'm clear on the requests that are moving forward. Councilmember Englander's indicated having CID begin the process of working with the DCR, and then CID working out a transition plan. Once an accelerated plan is in place for hiring DCR staff and CAO to, I guess, prepare a cost recovery on these plans. Your motion regarding noting and filing the...
Mine is unnecessary because it's already captured, I think, in the instruction that we'll be voting on when we vote on the instruction to the CAO to report back further.
But you're still noting and filing this current CAO report?
Yes.
Okay. And then there were a few other requests from the members. Did you want those also included?
Go ahead and read them.
I believe Councilmember Englander wanted regular reports to the committee and to Budget and Finance and at minimum Personnel Committee regarding department employees moving around and I guess vacancies and things like that, positions on loan, et cetera. So he didn't want to, I guess, find out at the end of the year that departments were short on staff or something like that. Did you want that as a report
yes,
back?
we should have that report back to Budget and Finance, I think, maybe by the end of January.
Okay.
Does that make sense, Ms. Packard?
Yes, and there's supposed to be a cannabis regulation and enforcement committee that is meeting with general managers, and their first meeting is supposed to take place the week of the 20th of January, but that'll be an appropriate time for us to come back and share information.
Perfect.
And in addition, I think Councilmember Blumenfeld had requested that I guess the DCR investigate leveraging private sector vendors for some DCR functions until they're able to take over those. Also, Councilmember Blumenfeld had requested, I guess, information regarding the costs of the appeals, basically a way to screen them, such as proximity, and as you indicated, I believe, such as a petition. Did you want to report back on that?
Well, in council, we're going to be voting on an instruction to have the CAO report back. So I think at least my suggestions were just as a precursor to what I'll want the CAO to report back if that report is approved. There's two reports on file, I think, for is this Wednesday? Tuesday or Wednesday?
Wednesday.
Okay, so one is the Budget and Finance report, which calls upon CAO to report back. The other is the Rules Committee report, which already includes the assumption of the $100 appeals fee. And so that will be a discussion for council, but from my perspective, I would want those included in the report back. I suppose, belts and suspenders, why don't we go ahead and include that as well in this committee's action, so that even if we don't approve a report instruction on Wednesday, we have another bite at the apple with what we're doing here today. So that probably makes sense. And then Mr. Blumenfield, was that it, Mr. Williams?
Yes.
Mr. Blumenfield, there was a request about private sector involvement. If it's a request for a report back on that from CAO and the department.
Yeah, I mean, that'd be great to get information on it.
That makes sense.
I don't know if it's a good thing or not, but it's, I mean, especially if other areas are doing it, to see if there is a way to leverage that is good information to have. So
are there functions that could feasibly be contracted?
Particularly in the inspection side of things, if there is a way to leverage for in the short term the private sector to make some of that happen, I'd want to know what those options are.
Okay. All right. Any objections to the actions as read by Mr. Williams? With the support of Mr. Englander and his reading of that. All right, then it will be the action. That will be the action of the committee. Without objection, thank you all very much. Great, thank you. And that brings us to item number 7.
Item number 7 is the CAO report relative to an increase to the 6th Street Viaduct Project landscaping budget and identification of sources of additional funding for remediation costs. On December 6, 2017, Public Works and Gang Reduction Committee approved this matter.
So I'm not going to ask you to give a full report on this, but just why is it that more money is being needed to implement this already very expensive public works project? What has happened that is requiring this additional funding? That's number one. What is the remediation need? And number two, what I'm mainly concerned about is I appreciate the CD14 stepping up with CD14 specific funding, but if we approve this, what impact is this going to have either directly or down the road on the general fund?
Bernice Hollins, Office of the CAO. For this item, I'm representing the Seismic Governance Committee. Essentially, the additional $6 million is for scope enhancements. They're options. They would be included in the bid as additive alternates, so that if those funds, a portion of the funds are future dollars, there aren't monies that we currently have. So if those monies do not materialize, we are not obligated to go forward with the enhancements, the scope enhancements.
Okay, that sounds like the magic words to me. Members, any questions on this, Mr. Blumenfield?
Yeah, given the uncertainties of environmental contamination, the contingency on this project is it 2%?
The contingency at this time, and I'd have to let BOE weigh in on the percentage, it's $1 million. The overall cost of the site remediation could go as high as $10 million. We are currently working on a number of fronts to identify funding towards those costs. On the First Avenue, we're looking to try to obtain additional funding from Caltrans just to go towards the project budget. Secondly, MTA Metro, there's a large plume of contamination that's affecting our site. We believe that we might be able to get them to contribute towards those costs. And then the third contribution towards the budget, there is a budget request in for CIEP funds as well. That would be in the 18-19 budget.
I guess what I was getting at is that 2%, my first glance is a big red flag, because contingencies are usually 10%, 20%. And so when I see a contingency that low, I'm thinking, well, that means we're going to blow through that budget, because even on the other ones, we tend to get pretty close to the contingency. So help me understand why it's so low and whether or not I'm misinterpreting it.
So I'll need to defer to BOE to speak to the greater budget itself.
Good afternoon, Julie Allen, Bureau of Engineering. The way the council office has asked to implement the additional $6 million in funding, they only wanted to provide that as construction funding, so it required us to basically match those funds for design out of our program contingency, so it did reduce our overall program contingency. But we are carrying construction contingency in the amount of 15% for change orders that happen during construction, as well as 10% contingency if the bids come in 10% higher than our award amount. So we do carry other contingency into the project budget other than the program contingency that's left over.
So the overall project contingency is what?
I would have to add them all together, but it would amount to approximately $4.5 million if you add the change order contingency and the bidding contingency in the total project budget.
So the contingency that's low is the what contingency?
We have a program that could cover any costs that for items of scope that we did not have money set aside for things that come up in permitting or environmental conditions. So that amount
is that a red flag for you at all?
It's something that we would prefer to carry a higher program contingency, especially this early in the project, but we think it's manageable and we can still adjust the scope as needed to maintain within our overall project budget.
And so if we don't, what happens?
We would have to further reduce scope to stay within the budget.
Okay, sorry, go ahead.
And so one of the things that's important to note is that we are still a little ways away from implementing this portion of the project. This is the landscaping park development component that would follow the completion of the 6th Street Bridge Viaduct. So the actual start of construction for the park component would be spring 2019. So we're going to continue to monitor these issues. One of the instructions that's included in the report is to provide instructions to staff to work on identifying additional funds to ensure that there's sufficient coverage for the full project.
And then another, with the Lacretz Bridge, we ended up in a situation where a generous gift led to a bigger design that didn't cover the actual costs, and we had to do all the adjustments. Is there a similar problem potentially with the Leonard Hills Arts Plaza funded with also a generous gift, the 1.9 million? Does that present any similar problems?
Hi, good afternoon. This is Gary Lam from the Bureau of Engineering. I'm the project manager for the park project. And we have vetted this out extensively with our consultant who's provided detailed cost estimates, breaking down each component of the park project. And the Leonard Hill Arts Plaza is one of those components that we've had him vigorously look at. And the consultant is committed to staying within the $2 million that the Leonard Hill Foundation is providing for the project here.
Okay. And what was the original budget for this project?
The original total project budget was $23 million.
So, thank you for pointing the contingency issues out, Mr. Blumenfield. That's a good point. I take some comfort in the fact that, as I read this, correct me if I'm wrong, while the program contingency is significantly reduced, we do have $600,000 increase in the bidding contingency and almost $1 million increase in the construction contingency from the original budget to what's proposed. And then the overall construction budget itself is increased by $6 million. So I get worried too about those contingencies, but we have a little extra padding in some of the other areas that will allow us to have a little margin of error. So, but at this point, we're not committing to anything for which funding does not otherwise become available.
No, as I said, this $6 million in discretionary funds would be reflected in the additive alternate. So it would only be the $23 million base bid that we would guarantee.
Okay. All right. Members, any other questions or concerns? Then what I would propose that we concur in the action of the Public Works and Gang Reduction Committee and advance the matter forward. And without objection, that will be the action of the committee. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We have lawyers waiting. Typically, I would go into closed session, but Mr. Previn, you are the only general public comment speaker, so come on up, take your minute now if you'd like. If you'd like. Come on up, because we're waiting closed session. So, as a courtesy so that you can exit, I'm going to go ahead and take your general public comment now.
The courtesy. This is, if I'm not mistaken, the closed session item, Steve Brown versus the City of Los Angeles. And I watched the ABC7 video, which did not show the entire incident, but it showed part of the incident in which the officers were beating the guy. He was on the ground, and he seemed to be cuffed, so it was unclear what was going on. There may be some part of that story, but it looked bad to a viewer of this video. I don't know, it was someone making the video from their cell phone. We simply have to do a better job of preventing these kinds of conduct and, where we get outside of what looks like good policy. Now, again, I'm very reluctant to make any kind of a judgment based on what I saw alone, but we simply have to find a system in which body cams are working, where we're preventing people from getting out of control. Those tasers are a disaster, so let's get rid of them. Thanks.
All right, thank you. That will take us then into closed session, and we'll begin with item number 2. All right, we've concluded our closed session items. Is there any other business before the committee, Mr. Williams?
No, sir, that clears the desk.
All right, with none, the committee is adjourned.